Before we dive into one of the most haunting cold cases that remained unsolved for nearly 3 decades, I need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button for Untold Case Desk, because what you're about to hear, a case that was finally cracked wide open in 2024 using cutting-edge DNA technology, is exactly why this channel exists. To bring you the real stories, where science refused to let victims stay forgotten. So, subscribe, turn on notifications, drop a like, and let's get into this. January 13th, 1995. A Friday evening in Beaumont, Texas, a city of about 115,000 people situated in the southeastern corner of the state, where the humid Gulf Coast air hangs heavy even in winter, and the pace of life moves just a little slower than the rest of the world. Beaumont sits about 90 miles east of Houston, close enough to feel the pulse of the big city but far enough away to maintain its own identity. It's an oil town, built on the back of the spindle-top gusher that came in back in 1901 and changed Texas forever. By 1995, it's a place where families put down roots, where kids grow up and often stay, where everyone seems to know everyone else, at least by reputation, if not by name. It's the kind of town where a murder, especially a brutal one, shakes the entire community to its core. 31-year-old Mary Catherine Edwards is finishing up her day at Price Elementary School, where she teaches 4th grade. Her classroom is on the 2nd floor, windows overlooking the playground where her students spend their recesses running, laughing, living the carefree existence of childhood that Catherine works hard to protect and nurture. She's been teaching for 8 years now, ever since graduating from Lamar University right there in Beaumont. Teaching isn't just a job for Catherine, it's a calling. Her students don't just learn math and reading and science in her classroom. They learn kindness. They learn that someone believes in them. They learn that education is the path to a better life. Catherine is the kind of teacher who stays late to help struggling students, who spends her own money decorating her classroom with colorful posters and educational materials, who remembers every single student's birthday and makes sure each one feels special, who writes encouraging notes on homework assignments, who sees potential in kids that other teachers might write off. Her colleagues at Price Elementary respect her deeply. The principal, Janet Morrison, will later tell investigators that Catherine was one of those rare teachers who made everyone around her better. She had this way of staying calm in any situation. She never raised her voice. She just had this presence that made kids want to do better, want to be better. Catherine has an identical twin sister named Allison Brocato. They're so close that they talk on the phone multiple times a day, every single day. They finish each other's sentences. They know instinctively when something's wrong with the other, that unexplainable twin connection that defies logic but exists nonetheless. They were born minutes apart and have been inseparable ever since. Growing up, they were so identical that even their own parents sometimes had trouble telling them apart. They played tricks on teachers, switched classes, covered for each other, but they weren't just twins, they were best friends. Allison got married a few years ago to a man named David Brocato. They have an infant daughter now, Catherine's niece, who Catherine absolutely adores. She's over at Allison's house constantly, holding the baby, playing with her, talking about how one day she hopes to have children of her own. Catherine is still single. She's dated over the years, but hasn't found the right person yet. Her family isn't worried. She's only 31. She's focused on her career, on her students, on being the best aunt she can be to her niece. The right person will come along when the time is right. On this particular Friday, January 13th, Catherine finishes up her day at school around 4 p.m. She's grading papers at her desk, making notes for Monday's lessons, tidying up her classroom the way she always does before the weekend. She doesn't believe in leaving a mess for Monday morning Catherine to deal with. She gathers her things, says goodbye to a few colleagues who are also working late, and heads out to her car. The drive from Price Elementary to Allison's house takes about 15 minutes. Catherine needs to pick up her beagle, a sweet-natured dog named Bailey that Allison has been watching for the day. Catherine pulls into Allison's driveway around 4:30 p.m. The sisters spend about an hour together. Catherine plays with her baby niece, bouncing her on her knee, making silly faces that send the baby into fits of giggles. She and Allison chat about their weekend plans. Nothing major. Catherine is planning to do some grocery shopping on Saturday, maybe catch up on laundry, grade more papers. The usual weekend routine of a dedicated teacher. Allison will later tell investigators that Catherine seemed a little quieter than usual that day. Not upset exactly, but maybe a little melancholy, a little sad. Allison asked her if everything was okay. Catherine said she was fine, just tired. It had been a long week at school, one of those details that becomes significant later, one of those conversations you replay endlessly in your mind, searching for clues you missed, for warnings you should have heeded but didn't because you couldn't imagine what was coming. Around 5:30 p.m., Catherine loads Bailey into her car and heads home. She lives in a townhouse on Park Meadow Street, off Major Drive in West Beaumont. It's a nice neighborhood, the kind of place where young professionals and small families live. The townhouses are well maintained, each one with a small front yard and a carport. Trees line the street. Kids ride bikes and play basketball in driveways. It's quiet, safe, the kind of neighborhood where people don't lock their doors, where crime is something you read about in the newspaper, happening in other cities, other neighborhoods, but never here. Catherine's townhouse is modest but comfortable. 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a small kitchen, and a living room that she's decorated with photos of her family, her students, her travels. She's neat, organized, everything in its place. Friends who visit her home always comment on how cozy it feels, how welcoming. This is Catherine's sanctuary, the place where she comes home after long days with 4th graders, where she can kick off her shoes, put on comfortable clothes, curl up on her couch with Bailey and a good book. This is where she should be safe, where everyone deserves to be safe. In their own home, Catherine pulls into her carport around 6 p.m. The sun is setting, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. It's January, so darkness comes early. The temperature is mild, probably in the low 60 seconds, typical for a South Texas winter. She unlocks her front door, Bailey trotting in ahead of her, tail wagging. She sets her bag down, probably planning to make dinner, maybe watch some television, enjoy a quiet Friday night at home. She has no idea that someone is watching. No idea that within hours, she'll be dead. No idea that her murder will become one of the most notorious cold cases in Southeast Texas history. No idea that it will take nearly 30 years and revolutionary DNA technology to finally bring her killer to justice. The following day, Saturday, January 14th, Catherine's family makes plans to meet for lunch. It's a regular thing for them, these Saturday family gatherings. Sometimes it's at a restaurant, sometimes at someone's home, but they make it a point to get together at least once a week. Family is everything to the Edwards clan. Catherine's parents, both in their early 60s, retired and enjoying this phase of their lives when they get to spend time with their daughters and granddaughter. They call Catherine's house around 11 a.m. to confirm the plans. No answer. They try again at 11:30. Still no answer. This is unusual. Catherine always answers her phone. She's reliable, responsible, the kind of person who calls back immediately if she misses a call. By noon, Catherine's mother is worried. Really worried. That maternal instinct that something is wrong. She calls Allison. "Have you heard from your sister today?" "No," Allison says, but tries to be reassuring. Maybe she's in the shower. Maybe she went for a walk with Bailey. Maybe she's at the grocery store and left her phone at home. But Allison is worried too. She tries calling Catherine's house. No answer. She tries again and again. By 1 p.m., both Catherine's mother and Allison are in full panic mode. They decide to drive to Catherine's townhouse. Catherine's father drives, his wife in the passenger seat wringing her hands, Allison in the back seat with David and the baby. The 15-minute drive feels like hours. They pull up to Catherine's townhouse around 1:30 p.m. Catherine's car is in the carport. She's home. So why isn't she answering the phone? Why isn't she answering the door? Catherine's father knocks. Catherine. Mija. It's us. Open up. Silence. He knocks harder, pounds on the door. Catherine. Nothing. He tries the doorknob. Locked. No signs of forced entry. Everything looks normal from the outside. But nothing about this feels normal. Catherine's mother is crying now. Something's wrong. Something's very wrong. We need to get inside. They have a key. Catherine gave them a spare key years ago, just in case. Catherine's father fumbles with his keychain, finds the right key, his hands shaking so badly he can barely get it in the lock. They open the door. Call out Catherine's name. The house is quiet. Too quiet. Bailey doesn't come running to greet them the way he normally would. Catherine, where are you? They move through the downstairs. The living room looks normal. Nothing disturbed. The kitchen is clean. No signs of a struggle. But Catherine isn't there. They head upstairs. Catherine's bedroom door is open. The bed is unmade, which isn't like Catherine. She always makes her bed. It's one of those little discipline things she does every morning. But maybe she slept in today. Maybe she was tired. They check the bedroom. Catherine isn't there. The bathroom door is partially open. Catherine's father reaches it first, and what he sees will haunt him for the rest of his life. Catherine is in the bathtub, her body slumped over the side, her head underwater, her hands behind her back in an unnatural position. He knows immediately she's dead. Can tell from the way her body is positioned, from the pallor of her skin, from the absolute stillness. He tries to shield his wife from seeing, but it's too late. She's right behind him. She sees her daughter's body, and the sound that comes out of her is something beyond words, beyond grief. It's the sound of a mother's heart breaking, a sound that once you hear it, you never forget it. Allison, standing at the top of the stairs with her husband, hears that sound, knows instinctively what it means. David grabs her, won't let her go into the bathroom. Don't look, he tells her. You don't want to see. But Allison already knows. Her twin sister, the person she shared a womb with, the person she's been connected to for every single day of her 31 years on Earth, is gone. She collapses. Just collapses, right there on the landing, sobbing, screaming her sister's name. Catherine's father, moving on pure autopilot, runs downstairs to the phone. His hands are shaking so badly he can barely dial 911. When the operator answers, he can barely get the words out. My daughter. She's dead. My daughter's been murdered. The 911 recording of that call will be played years later in court proceedings. It's almost unbearable to listen to. The raw anguish in his voice. The operator trying to get information. Sir, I need you to tell me what happened. Is she breathing? No, she's not breathing. She's in the bathtub. Her hands are tied behind her back. Oh God. Oh God. Who would do this? Is she shot? Was there a break-in? I don't know. I don't know. There's no blood. Just please send someone. Please. Units are on the way, sir. They're coming right now. Stay on the line with me. Beaumont Police Department receives the call at 1:47 p.m. Multiple units respond. Patrol officers arrive within 4 minutes, securing the scene immediately. This is clearly a homicide. This is clearly a crime scene that needs to be preserved. They keep the family downstairs, away from the bathroom, away from Catherine's body. More officers arrive. The scene is cordoned off with yellow crime scene tape. Neighbors start coming out of their townhouses, standing on their lawns, trying to see what's happening. Police cars, ambulances, the medical examiner's van, all parked along Park Meadow Street. Detectives are called in. This is a Saturday afternoon. Some of them are off duty, but everyone comes in when they hear it's a murder. Murders are rare in Beaumont. A murder of a young schoolteacher in her own home is even rarer. This is going to be a major investigation. Detective Rick Zimmerman catches the case. He's a veteran detective, 20 years with the department, worked everything from burglary to robbery to assault, but murders are unusual enough in Beaumont that even experienced detectives don't have dozens of them under their belt. He arrives at the scene around 2:30 p.m., confers with the patrol officers who responded first, then heads upstairs to see the victim. The bathroom is small, Standard townhouse bathroom. Tub-shower combination. Sink. Toilet. And Catherine Edwards' body, slumped in the tub. Detective Zimmerman is a professional. He's seen death before. But this scene hits him hard. The way her hands are secured behind her back. The position of her body. The 4 to 5 inches of water still in the tub. He doesn't touch anything yet. The crime scene techs need to photograph everything first, document everything, collect evidence before anyone disturbs the scene. He steps back, lets them do their work. The photographer moves methodically through the bathroom, capturing every angle, every detail. The position of the body, the handcuffs binding Catherine's wrists, the water level in the tub, the condition of the bathroom, everything. Because you only get one chance at a pristine crime scene. Once people start moving through it, once the body is moved, once evidence is collected, you can never get that first look back. The medical examiner, Dr. Thomas Harlan, arrives around 3 p.m. He examines Catherine's body in situ before it's moved, makes preliminary observations about the condition of the body, rigor mortis, lividity, temperature. Based on his initial assessment, he estimates time of death as sometime late Friday night or early Saturday morning. So Catherine has been dead for approximately 12 to 18 hours. The handcuffs are immediately notable. They're not toy handcuffs or novelty items. They're real Smith & Wesson police issue handcuffs. Detective Zimmerman photographs the serial numbers. Later, they'll try to trace where these specific handcuffs came from, but it will lead nowhere. Smith & Wesson has sold millions of handcuffs over the decades to law enforcement agencies, security companies, military installations, all over the world. There's no way to trace these specific cuffs to a specific purchaser, but the fact that they're real police handcuffs is significant. It suggests the killer either is in law enforcement, was in law enforcement, or has some connection to law enforcement, or possibly has access to police equipment through family or friends. This becomes a major focus of the investigation early on. When Catherine's body is removed from the tub, when they can examine her more closely, they find evidence of sexual assault. This wasn't just a murder. This was rape and murder. This was a sexual predator who attacked Catherine in her own home, assaulted her, handcuffed her, and killed her. Dr. Harlan notes that there are no obvious signs of blunt force trauma to the head, no gunshot wounds, no stab wounds. The preliminary cause of death appears to be drowning, though he won't make a final determination until the autopsy is complete. The theory, based on the scene, is that Catherine was handcuffed, assaulted, and then either forcibly held underwater until she drowned, or was unable to keep her head above water while handcuffed and drowned as a result. While the medical examiner works, crime scene technicians process the rest of the townhouse. They're looking for signs of forced entry. They find none. The front door was locked when Catherine's family arrived. The windows are all locked from the inside. There are no broken windows, no jimmied locks, nothing to suggest someone broke in, which means Catherine most likely opened the door to her killer. She let him in voluntarily, which suggests she knew him, or at least knew him well enough to feel comfortable opening her door to him on a Friday evening. This is a crucial detail. In the living room, crime scene techs find Catherine's purse on the couch, wallet inside with cash and credit cards still there. This wasn't a robbery. Nothing appears to be stolen. Catherine's car keys are on the kitchen counter. Her car is untouched in the carport. In the bedroom, they collect the bedding. There are signs that sexual activity occurred on the bed. They bag everything carefully. The sheets, the pillowcases, the comforter. Everything goes to the lab for analysis. In the bathroom, they collect swabs from Catherine's body. They collect the water from the tub, though after 12 to 18 hours, any biological evidence would be heavily diluted. They dust for fingerprints. They vacuum for trace evidence, hairs, fibers, anything that might connect to the killer. And they find semen, both on Catherine's body and on the bedding from her room. In 1995, DNA technology exists. It's been admissible in court since the late 1982. But it's nothing like what we have in 2025. The process is slow, expensive, and requires relatively pristine samples. But it's still their best hope for identifying the killer. The evidence is sent to the Texas Department of Public Safety Crime Lab in Houston. It will take weeks to get results. In the meantime, Detective Zimmerman and his team begin the painstaking process of investigating every aspect of Catherine Edwards' life. They interview Allison first, though she's barely able to speak through her grief. She tells them everything she knows about her sister's life. Catherine didn't have any enemies. Everyone loved her. She didn't have a boyfriend currently. She'd dated a few men over the years, but nothing serious recently. There was no ex-boyfriend with a grudge, no stalker that Catherine had mentioned, no one who made her feel uncomfortable or unsafe. She was just living her life, teaching, spending time with family, being a wonderful aunt to Allison's daughter. Allison mentions that Catherine seemed a little sad when she picked up Bailey on Friday evening. Not upset, not scared, just quiet. Tired, maybe. But nothing that set off alarm bells. Nothing that would make Allison think her sister was in danger. They interview Catherine's parents. Same story. Catherine was a good girl. Never any trouble. Close to her family. Dedicated to her students. No enemies. No one who would want to hurt her. They interview Catherine's co-workers at Price Elementary. The school is closed for the weekend, but Principal Janet Morrison calls in teachers who worked closely with Catherine. Everyone says the same thing. Catherine was kind, patient, professional. She got along with everyone, never had any conflicts with other teachers, with parents, with students. Never mentioned being afraid of anyone, or being bothered by anyone. They ask about any male teachers or staff who might have shown interest in Catherine. There's a custodian who people thought maybe had a crush on her, but it was harmless. He was shy, never even talked to her much. They interview him anyway. He's devastated by the news of Catherine's death, cooperates fully, provides an alibi for Friday night. He was at his second job, working night security at a warehouse. Time cards and security footage confirm it. He's not their guy. They expand the search. Interview Catherine's friends from college, from her church, from her neighborhood. Talk to shopkeepers at places Catherine frequented. The grocery store where she shopped every week. The coffee shop where she sometimes graded papers on Sunday afternoons. The veterinary clinic where she took Bailey for checkups. Everyone loved Catherine. No one had anything negative to say. No one had any idea who would want to hurt her. Detective Zimmerman pulls records on every registered sex offender within a 30-mile radius of Beaumont. In 1995, sex offender registries are relatively new, but they exist. Texas began requiring registration in 1991. He creates a list of every offender with a history of sexual assault, rape, or violence against women. It's a long list. Too long. He and his team start working through it methodically, bringing men in for questioning. Where were you Friday night, January 13th? Can anyone verify that? Do you know Catherine Edwards? Have you ever been to Park Meadow Street? Most of them have alibis. Family members, employers, parole officers who can confirm their whereabouts. The ones who don't have solid alibis become persons of interest. They're asked to provide DNA samples. Most comply voluntarily. A few refuse, which requires getting court orders. But one by one, they're eliminated. Their DNA doesn't match the semen found at the crime scene. Weeks pass. The DNA results from the crime lab come back. They have a full male DNA profile from the semen samples collected from Catherine's body and bedroom. It's entered into CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System that the FBI launched nationally in 1994, just a year before Catherine's murder. CODIS is revolutionary. It allows DNA from crime scenes to be compared against DNA from convicted offenders all across the country. If the person who killed Catherine Edwards has been convicted of a crime anywhere in the United States and had their DNA collected, CODIS will find the match. But when they run the profile, they get nothing. No matches. Whoever killed Catherine Edwards isn't in the system. Either he's never been arrested, or he was arrested before DNA collection became standard, or he was arrested in a state that hadn't yet implemented DNA collection in 1995. It's a devastating blow to the investigation. DNA was supposed to be their silver bullet, the evidence that would point them directly to the killer. But without a match, the DNA profile is just a string of genetic markers sitting in a database, waiting for someone to match it to. Detective Zimmerman doesn't give up. He continues investigating, continues following every lead that comes in, and tips do come in. After Catherine's murder is reported in the local news, after the Beaumont Enterprise runs a front-page story with Catherine's photo, after local television stations do segments about the murdered schoolteacher, people call. They always call. Some tips are legitimate. People who saw something suspicious in the neighborhood that Friday night. A car that didn't belong. A person walking around who seemed out of place. Every single tip is investigated. Every single lead is followed up on. Most go nowhere. Some seem promising initially, but ultimately don't pan out. One neighbor reports seeing an unfamiliar vehicle parked on the street Friday evening around 7 p.m. She can't remember the make or model now, nearly 30 years later, but she remembers it was there because she had to park further down the street than usual. Dark-colored, she thinks. Maybe blue or black. Again, it seemed insignificant at the time, but now, with context, it might have been connected. Police canvass the neighborhood with that information. Did anyone else see this vehicle? Does anyone know who might have been visiting someone on Park Meadow Street that evening? They get conflicting reports. One person thinks they saw a dark sedan. Another person remembers a truck. Someone else insists there were no unusual vehicles. Eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable. Detective Zimmerman knows this, but he follows up anyway. Checks with residents to see if anyone was expecting visitors that night. If anyone can account for an unfamiliar vehicle, no one can. The dark sedan, if it even existed, remains a mystery. Months pass. The case starts to cool. Not because police stop working it, but because they've exhausted the obvious leads. They've interviewed everyone connected to Catherine. They've tested every sex offender in the region. They've followed up on every tip. The DNA profile sits in CODIS, waiting for a match that never comes. Detective Zimmerman keeps the case file on his desk for 2 years. Even after he's assigned new cases, even after he's told to prioritize active investigations, he keeps Catherine's file close, pulls it out periodically and reviews everything, looking for something he might have missed. Some detail that didn't seem significant before but might matter now. He finds nothing. In 1997, Detective Zimmerman retires from the Beaumont Police Department. Before he leaves, he meets with the detective who will inherit Catherine's case, tells him everything he knows, tells him about the handcuffs, about the DNA in CODIS, about the dark sedan that may or may not have existed, tells him not to give up. Someone out there knows who killed Catherine Edwards. Someone out there might be living with that secret, might want to come forward, might eventually make a mistake. The case is reassigned several times over the years. Each new detective reviews the file, looks for fresh angles, but there's nowhere new to go. The case officially goes cold. Not closed, because you can't close a murder without an arrest, but cold. Filed away. One of dozens of unsolved homicides in Southeast Texas. One of thousands across the state. One of tens of thousands across the country. Catherine Edwards becomes a statistic, a name in a database, a cold case. For Catherine's family, life fractures into before and after. Before, January 13th, 1995, and after. Her parents try to move forward, try to find some way to live with the unanswered questions. But it's impossible. How do you move forward when your daughter's killer is still out there? When every day you wake up wondering if today will be the day the police call with news. When you see men on the street and wonder, is it him? Could it be him? Is that the person who murdered my daughter? Catherine's father develops heart problems in the years after her death. Stress, grief, the weight of carrying unanswered questions. He has a heart attack in 1999, survives but never fully recovers. His health declines steadily. He dies in 2008, 13 years after Catherine's murder, having never learned who killed his daughter. Catherine's mother holds on longer. She becomes active in victim advocacy groups, attends support groups for families of murder victims, meets other parents, other siblings, other spouses who understand the unique agony of having a loved one taken by violence and never getting justice. She speaks at community events about Catherine's case, shows Catherine's photo, begs anyone with information to come forward. Please, if you know anything, call the police. Help us find who did this. She updates her DNA sample every few years as technology improves. The original sample she gave in 1995 is degraded, so in 2003, she gives a new sample using better collection methods. In 2010, she gives another sample when mitochondrial DNA testing becomes more widely available. She keeps hoping that somehow, someday, science will advance enough to give her answers, but the years pass, and nothing changes. The case remains cold. Catherine's mother dies in 2015, 20 years after her daughter's murder. She's 82 years old. She dies without ever knowing who killed Catherine, without ever seeing anyone arrested, without ever getting the closure she desperately needed. At her funeral, friends say she never recovered from losing Catherine. That part of her died in that townhouse bathroom in 1995. That she spent 20 years just going through the motions of living while waiting for answers that never came. Allison, Catherine's twin, somehow finds a way to keep living. She has to, for her daughter, who is now a young woman herself. But the bond she shared with Catherine, that twin connection, was severed violently, and it never heals. She tells friends it's like walking around with half of yourself missing, like phantom limb pain, except it's her soul that aches. She thinks about Catherine every single day, wonders what her life would have been like if Catherine had lived. Would Catherine have gotten married, had children? Would their kids have grown up together? Would they have grown old together? Two elderly twin sisters, finishing each other's sentences. Every January 13th, Allison visits Catherine's grave, brings flowers, sits there and talks to her sister, tells her about her life, about her daughter, about the world Catherine is missing, tells her she hasn't given up, that someday, somehow, they'll find who did this. The years blur together. 1,995 becomes 2,000. 2,000 becomes 2005. 2005 becomes 2010. 2 decades pass. Catherine Edwards' case remains unsolved. But while the case sits cold, while Catherine's family ages and grieves and waits, something else is happening. Technology is advancing. In ways that would have seemed like science fiction in 1995, DNA analysis is evolving, improving, becoming more sophisticated and more powerful. In the early 2000s, DNA testing requires relatively large samples and pristine conditions, but as the years pass, new techniques emerge. Low copy number DNA testing can work with just a few cells. Touch DNA can extract profiles from surfaces that were merely touched, not just biological fluids. Mitochondrial DNA testing can work with degraded samples that nuclear DNA testing can't process. Y chromosome testing can identify male DNA in mixed samples. SNP testing, single nucleotide polymorphism testing, can extract usable profiles from DNA that's been shattered, degraded, damaged by time and environmental conditions. And before we continue with how this technology changed everything, I need you to do something. If you're still with me on this journey, if this case is gripping you the way it grips me, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think about using genetic genealogy to solve cold cases. Is it a powerful tool for justice or an invasion of privacy? And share this video because Catherine Edwards deserves to have her story told. Her family deserves to be remembered. Subscribe to Untold Case Desk if you haven't already, because we're about to get into the breakthrough that changed everything. And then, in the mid-2010 seconds, something revolutionary emerges. Forensic genetic genealogy. It's a technique that combines DNA analysis with traditional genealogical research, and it's about to change cold case investigation forever. The breakthrough comes in 2018 with the capture of the Golden State Killer. Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer, terrorized California in the 1,970 seconds and 1,980 seconds as a serial rapist and murderer. He committed at least 13 murders, 50 rapes, and over 100 burglaries. He was one of the most prolific serial predators in American history, and he was never caught. His DNA was collected from crime scenes. It was in CODIS, but there were no matches. DeAngelo had never been arrested for anything that required DNA collection. The case sat cold for decades, until 2018, when investigators tried something new. They took the DNA profile from the crime scenes and uploaded it to GEDmatch, a public genealogy database where people upload their DNA results from companies like 23andMe and Ancestry.com to find relatives and build family trees. They got a hit. Not a direct match, but a distant relative. Someone who shared enough DNA with the Golden State Killer to indicate they had a common ancestor a few generations back. From that one match, a team of investigators and genetic genealogists built a massive family tree, identified common ancestors, worked forward through generations, narrowed down possibilities, and finally identified Joseph James DeAngelo as a suspect. Police surveilled him, collected his DNA from trash left at his curb, and confirmed the match. After 40 years, the Golden State Killer was behind bars. The case made international headlines, and it opened the door for other cold cases to be solved using the same technique. Suddenly, cases that had seemed unsolvable, cases where the DNA was in CODIS but yielded no matches, could be revisited. All across the country, police departments started partnering with genetic genealogy companies. Cold case units started sending evidence for retesting with new technologies, and families who had waited decades for answers started getting phone calls. Your loved one's case is being reopened. We have new leads. We may have identified a suspect. In 2020, the Texas Rangers Unsolved Crimes Investigation Program, which focuses specifically on cold cases across Texas, decides to take another look at Catherine Edwards' murder. It's been 25 years. Her parents are both deceased. But Allison is still alive, still waiting for answers. The original DNA evidence, carefully preserved all these years, is still in storage. And now there are new technologies that didn't exist in 1995, that didn't even exist in 2015, technologies that might finally identify Catherine's killer. The Texas Rangers partner with Othram Incorporated, a cutting-edge forensic laboratory located in the Woodlands, Texas, just north of Houston. Othram was founded in 2018 specifically to apply advanced DNA sequencing technologies to forensic cases. They've worked some of the highest-profile cases in recent years, including helping identify victims of the Gilgo Beach serial killings in New York and assisting in the investigation of the Idaho college student murders. Othram's technology is called forensic-grade genome sequencing. Traditional DNA testing looks at specific genetic markers, usually 13 to 20 locations in the genome. It's like looking at 20 specific points on a map. Othram's technology sequences hundreds of thousands of locations. It's like having the entire map in high resolution. This level of detail means they can work with DNA samples that traditional methods would reject as too degraded, too contaminated, or insufficient in quantity. They can separate mixed samples, distinguish between victim DNA and suspect DNA even when they're combined. They can extract usable profiles from evidence that's decades old, that's been stored in less than ideal conditions, that's been through heat, moisture, time. In early 2020, the remaining evidence from Catherine Edwards' murder is sent to Othram's lab. There isn't much left. Most of the biological samples collected in 1995 were consumed during the original testing. But there's enough. Small samples that were preserved, stored in freezers, protected from degradation as much as possible. Othram's lab scientists receive the evidence and begin their work. It's painstaking, technical, requiring expertise in both molecular biology and forensic science. They extract DNA from the samples. They use specialized techniques to amplify even the smallest amounts of genetic material. They sequence the DNA, generating massive amounts of data. They analyze that data, comparing the victim's DNA profile, which they have from the samples Catherine's mother provided decades ago, against the unknown male DNA found at the scene. And they succeed. They produce an enhanced DNA profile from the unknown male, a profile that's suitable for forensic genetic genealogy, suitable for uploading to genetic genealogy databases to search for relatives. The profile is uploaded to GEDmatch Pro, which is the law enforcement portal for GEDmatch. Regular GEDmatch is used by everyday people for genealogy research. GEDmatch Pro is restricted to law enforcement and can be used only for violent crimes and identifying human remains. The system compares the unknown male's DNA against the hundreds of thousands of profiles in the database. People who have uploaded their DNA results from 23andMe, Ancestry.com, MyHeritage, and other companies, hoping to find cousins, learn about their ethnicity, explore their family history. Most of these people have no idea their DNA might someday help solve a murder. The search produces a match. A woman living in Louisiana. She shares approximately 250 centimorgans of DNA with the unknown male from Catherine's crime scene. To put that in context, you share about 3,400 centimorgans with a parent or sibling, about 1,700 with a grandparent or aunt, uncle, about 850 with a first cousin, and about 425 with a first cousin once removed. At 250 centimorgans, she's approximately a second cousin to the unknown male, which means they share a pair of great-grandparents. She has no idea she's a genetic match to a killer. She uploaded her DNA to GEDmatch years ago because she was curious about her family history. She's never been contacted by law enforcement before, and she's about to become a crucial witness in solving a murder, though she may never even know it. The Louisiana woman isn't contacted directly. Law enforcement doesn't need her permission to use the genetic information she voluntarily uploaded to a public database. They just need the match to start building a family tree. Detective Tina Llewellyn from Beaumont Police Department takes the lead on the investigative genealogy work. She's 38 years old, has been with the department for 14 years, and has a personal interest in cold cases. Her own aunt disappeared in the 1,980 seconds and was never found, so she understands what families of unsolved cases go through. That endless waiting, that never having closure, that wondering every single day what happened. She's passionate about this work in a way that goes beyond professional duty. Her husband, Detective Aaron Llewellyn, also works for Beaumont PD. They're a team, both in life and in this investigation. They partner with Shara LaPointe, a professional genetic genealogist who specializes in forensic cases. Shara has worked dozens of cold cases across the country, using DNA matches to build family trees that lead to suspects. She's developed a reputation in the forensic genealogy community as someone who can untangle even the most complex family structures. And this case, it turns out, is going to be complex. When Shara starts examining the DNA match and begins building the family tree, she immediately recognizes something. The names she's seeing, the families she's tracing, they're Cajun. Cajun genealogy is notoriously difficult. The Cajuns, also called Acadians, descend from French colonists who settled in Acadia, which is now the Canadian maritime provinces of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island, back in the 1600s. In 1755, during the French and Indian War, the British expelled them from Acadia in what's known as the Great Upheaval, or Le Grand Arrangement. Thousands of Acadians were forced from their homes, their land confiscated, families separated. Many eventually made their way to Louisiana, where they settled in the Bayou country and became known as Cajuns. Because the original population was small and relatively isolated, and because they maintained their Catholic faith, which encouraged large families, and because they often married within their community, Cajun family trees are incredibly intertwined. It's not uncommon to find the same surnames appearing multiple times in a single family tree. To find people who are related to each other in multiple ways, both through their mother's side and their father's side. To find individuals who are simultaneously second cousins and third cousins once removed to the same person through different lineages. Shara LaPointe later tells reporters that when she first looked at the family tree, it was full of Cajun names, many of them people she actually knew from her own genealogy research. She lives in Louisiana herself and has Cajun ancestry, so she's familiar with these families. But familiar doesn't mean simple. She knows this is going to take time. She starts with the second cousin match, the woman in Louisiana who shares 250 centimorgans with the unknown male. Shara begins researching this woman's ancestry, going back generation by generation, birth certificates, death certificates, marriage records, census data, church records, obituaries, military records, anything that documents family relationships. She identifies the woman's parents, her grandparents, her great-grandparents, and that's where she finds the common ancestors she's looking for. A couple who lived in Louisiana in the late 1800s and early 1900s. They had multiple children, and their descendants spread throughout Louisiana and into Texas. From those common ancestors, Shara starts building forward, identifying all of their children, then all of their grandchildren, then all of their great-grandchildren, creating a massive family tree that includes hundreds of people, all potential relatives of the unknown male. But she's not looking for all the descendants. She's looking specifically for males who would have been the right age in 1995 to have committed this murder. Males who would have been roughly 18 to 50 years old. Males who had some connection to Beaumont, Texas. This is where traditional detective work meets genetic genealogy. As Shara identifies potential candidates, detectives Tina and Aaron Llewellyn investigate them. Where were they living in 1995? What were they doing? Do they have criminal records? Can they be eliminated through alibis or other evidence? It's a process of elimination. The family tree might have 50 potential candidates. 20 of them are eliminated because they were living in other states in 1995 and have no connection to Texas. 10 more are eliminated because they were too old or too young. 5 more are eliminated because they died before 1995. That leaves 15 possibilities. Those 15 are investigated in depth. Background checks, employment records, property records, court records, looking for any connection to Beaumont, any criminal history, anything that might make one person stand out. And one person does stand out. Clayton Bernard Foreman, born the 15th of March 1949, making him 45 years old in January 1995. Grew up in Beaumont, Texas, attended Forest Park High School, the same high school Catherine Edwards attended, though he graduated years before her since he's 14 years older. But there's more, much more. When the Llewellyns pull up Foreman's criminal history, they find something that makes their blood run cold. An arrest in 1981 for sexual assault in Beaumont, a case involving a 19-year-old woman who reported that Clayton Foreman had raped her. They pull the case file, dusty, stored in archives, more than 40 years old. They read the victim's statement. Paula Bledsoe, 19 years old at the time, reported on the 29th of March 1981 that Clayton Foreman had assaulted her. According to her statement, Foreman offered her a ride. She accepted, not thinking anything was wrong. She knew who he was. They had mutual acquaintances. She thought she was safe. But once she was in his car, Foreman's demeanor changed. He drove to a secluded area. He pulled out a knife. He restrained her hands behind her back with a belt. And then he raped her. Repeatedly. For over an hour. When he was finished, he drove her home and dropped her off. As if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't just violently assaulted her. Hadn't just traumatized her in ways that would last a lifetime. Paula didn't report it immediately. She was ashamed, scared, confused. She thought maybe it was her fault for getting in his car. Thought maybe people wouldn't believe her. Thought maybe nothing would happen even if she did report it. But a week later, she found the courage to go to the police. She gave a detailed statement. She submitted to a rape kit examination. She identified Clayton Foreman as her attacker. Foreman was arrested and charged with aggravated sexual assault. But here's where the justice system failed Paula Bledsoe. The case didn't go to trial. Foreman's attorney negotiated a plea deal. Foreman would plead guilty to a reduced charge, aggravated assault, not sexual assault. He would receive 3 years of probation. No prison time, just probation and a fine. In 1981, rape cases were notoriously difficult to prosecute. Victims were put on trial, their sexual history examined, their clothing choices questioned, their behavior scrutinized. Did you lead him on? Were you drinking? What were you wearing? The burden of proof was on the victim to prove she hadn't consented, rather than on the defendant to prove she had. Many prosecutors didn't want to take rape cases to trial because they were hard to win, so they plea bargained. Reduced charges, lighter sentences, probation instead of prison. It was easier, faster, guaranteed a conviction, even if it was for a lesser charge, but it meant predators like Clayton Foreman walked free, got a slap on the wrist for violent sexual assault, got the message that what they did wasn't really that serious, that they could do it again and probably get away with it. Foreman completed his probation, paid his fine, and went on with his life. He was engaged to a woman named Diana DeLeo Coe. He hadn't told her about the arrest, about the assault charges, about the plea deal. When she found out just days before their scheduled wedding in January 1982, Foreman lied to her. He told her it was all a misunderstanding, that the charges had been dismissed, that the girl had made it up. Diana believed him. She wanted to believe him. They'd been planning this wedding for months. Their families were excited. Everything was ready. So, she chose to believe his lies. They got married on the 23rd of January, 1982, at St. Anne Catholic Church in Beaumont. It was a traditional Catholic wedding, large wedding party, formal ceremony, reception with dinner and dancing, and among the bridesmaids, standing up at Clayton Foreman's wedding, celebrating what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of his life, were 2 young women, twin sisters, Catherine Edwards and Allison Edwards, who wouldn't become Allison Brocato for several more years. They were friends with Diana, the bride. They wore matching bridesmaid dresses. They smiled for photographs. They had no idea that the man they were celebrating, the man Diana was marrying, was a rapist who had violently assaulted a woman just months earlier. They had no idea that 13 years later, Clayton Foreman would murder one of them in her own home. When detectives Tina and Aaron Llewellyn discover the connection between Foreman and Catherine Edwards, when they find the wedding photos showing Catherine and Allison as bridesmaids in Foreman's wedding, they know they've found their killer. The pieces are fitting together in a way that makes horrifying sense. Foreman knew Catherine. They'd attended the same high school, though years apart. She'd been a bridesmaid in his wedding. They probably saw each other occasionally over the years at social events, possibly at high school reunions. Catherine would have known who Clayton Foreman was, would have recognized him if he showed up at her door, would have had no reason to fear him, no reason not to let him inside her townhouse if he came by with some excuse. Maybe he said he needed to talk to her about something. Maybe he said he was in the neighborhood and wanted to say hello. Maybe he said Diana had sent him with a message. Whatever story he told, Catherine believed it. She opened her door to him, let him into her home, and it cost her her life. The similarities between the 1,981 assault and the 1,995 murder are chilling. In both cases, Foreman restrained his victim's hands behind her back. In 1981, he used a belt. In 1995, he used handcuffs. In both cases, he sexually assaulted his victim. In both cases, he used the restraints to maintain control, to render his victim helpless. This is his pattern. This is what he does. But there's a crucial difference. Paula Bledsoe survived. Catherine Edwards didn't. Was that always Foreman's intention in 1,995, or did something go wrong? Did Catherine fight back more than he expected? Did he panic? Did he decide he couldn't risk leaving a witness who could identify him? The investigators will never know for sure unless Foreman talks, and he's not talking. But what they do know is this: Clayton Foreman is a predator. He escalated from rape to murder, and he's been walking free for 29 years while Catherine's family suffered. Now comes the hard part: confirming that the genetic genealogy is correct. They have a family tree that points to Clayton Foreman. They have his criminal history showing a pattern of sexual violence. They have the connection to Catherine through the wedding. But they need definitive proof. They need Foreman's actual DNA to compare to the crime scene evidence. They could get a warrant for his DNA, bring him in, make him provide a sample. But there's an easier way, one that doesn't tip him off that he's being investigated, one that gives them the evidence they need without alerting him that 29 years later, his past is catching up with him. Detectives Tina and Aaron Llewellyn discover that Clayton Foreman moved from Beaumont years ago. After his divorce from Deanna in the mid-1992s, not long after Catherine's murder, Foreman bounced around for a while. He moved to Dallas for a few years, then to Oklahoma. Then, in 2007, he relocated to Ohio. He's been living in Reynoldsburg, Ohio, a suburb of Columbus, for the past 13 years. He works as an Uber driver, lives in a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. His neighbors describe him as friendly, quiet, keeps to himself. No one in Ohio has any idea about his past. No one knows about the 1,981 sexual assault conviction in Texas. No one knows that police in Beaumont have connected him to a murder. He thinks he got away with it. He thinks that after nearly 3 decades, he's safe. He's wrong. In April 2021, Texas Rangers and Beaumont police coordinate with law enforcement in Ohio. They need to collect Foreman's DNA without his knowledge. The easiest way to do this is through trash collection. In the United States, once you put trash out on the curb for collection, you've abandoned it. Law enforcement can legally search it without a warrant. It's called the abandoned property doctrine, established by the Supreme Court. People have no reasonable expectation of privacy in trash they've discarded, so they wait for trash day. Conduct surveillance on Foreman's house. Watch as he brings his trash cans out to the curb the night before pickup, and in the early morning hours, before the garbage truck arrives, an FBI agent grabs a couple of bags from Foreman's trash can and secures them as evidence. The bags are sent back to Texas, to Detective Aaron Llewellyn, who transports them to the lab for analysis. Inside the trash, lab technicians find several items that could contain Foreman's DNA: a used tissue, a plastic bottle he'd drunk from, a disposable razor, a cotton swab. Any of these items could contain epithelial cells from his skin or saliva or both. The samples are processed. DNA is extracted. A profile is generated, and it's sent to Othram for comparison against the DNA profile from Catherine Edwards' crime scene. The results come back within a week. It's a match. Clayton Foreman's DNA, collected from his trash, matches the DNA found on Catherine Edwards' body, matches the DNA found on her bedding, matches the DNA that's been sitting in CODIS since 1995, waiting for a name to attach to it. This isn't a familial match. This isn't a genetic genealogy inference. This is a direct, definitive match. Clayton Bernard Foreman raped and murdered Catherine Edwards on the 13th of January 1995. The evidence is conclusive. Now they can make the arrest. But before they do, they want to talk to him. They want to see if he'll confess. They want to hear what he has to say after 29 years of living with what he did. On the 10th of June 2021, Texas Ranger Brandon Bess and Detective Aaron Llewellyn fly to Ohio. They coordinate with local law enforcement in Reynoldsburg. They contact Clayton Foreman, tell him they're investigating a cold case from Texas and they'd like to ask him some questions. Would he be willing to come in and talk to them? Foreman agrees. He probably thinks he can talk his way out of whatever this is. Probably thinks he's smart enough to deflect suspicion. Probably thinks that after nearly 3 decades, there can't possibly be any evidence connecting him to Catherine's murder. He arrives at the police station on the 11th of June, 2021. He's 72 years old now. Gray hair, glasses, looks like someone's grandfather. Looks completely harmless. Looks nothing like a rapist and murderer. But that's the thing about predators. They don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like regular people. Sometimes they're someone you know, someone you trust, someone you'd never suspect. Foreman is taken to an interview room. Standard setup, table bolted to the floor. 3 chairs. Camera in the corner, recording everything. Texas Ranger Brandon Bess and Detective Aaron Llewellyn enter. They introduce themselves. Read Foreman, his Miranda rights. He has the right to remain silent. Anything he says can be used against him in court. He has the right to an attorney. If he can't afford an attorney, one will be provided. Does he understand these rights? Yes, he understands. Does he wish to speak with them without an attorney present? Yes, he'll talk. First mistake. But Foreman doesn't know yet that they have his DNA, doesn't know about the trash collection, doesn't know that genetic genealogy led investigators directly to him, doesn't know that he's already caught. The interview lasts 46 minutes. The investigators start slow. They tell Foreman they're investigating the 1995 murder of Catherine Edwards, a schoolteacher from Beaumont. Do you remember hearing about that case? Foreman says yes, he remembers. It was big news in Beaumont. Terrible thing. Did you know Catherine Edwards? The question is asked casually, like they're just gathering background information. Foreman hesitates, just for a moment, but the investigators notice. Then he says, not really. He might have met her once or twice. She was a friend of his ex-wife Deanna, but he didn't know her well. The investigators let him talk, let him commit to his story, let him dig himself into a hole he won't be able to climb out of. They ask follow-up questions. When was the last time you saw Catherine Edwards? Foreman says he can't remember. Maybe at his wedding in 1982. Maybe at some social event in the years after. But it would have been years before she died. They wouldn't have had any reason to interact. Did you ever go to her house? No, never. There would be no reason for him to go there. He didn't know her that well. So if we were to process your DNA, the investigators ask, would we find any reason it would be in Catherine Edwards' home? Would we find any reason it would be on her body? Foreman's face changes, just slightly, but it's there. A flicker of fear, a tightening around his eyes. No, he says. There's no reason my DNA would be anywhere near her. I barely knew her. I never went to her house. I had nothing to do with what happened to her. The investigators lean back in their chairs. They let silence fill the room, let Foreman sit there wondering where this is going. Then they tell him about the DNA. Tell him that evidence from Catherine's murder was retested using new technology. Tell him that a profile was developed and entered into genetic genealogy databases. Tell him that investigators built a family tree that led directly to him. Tell him that his DNA was collected from trash at his home in Ohio. Tell him that it matches. Definitively. Conclusively. His DNA is inside Catherine Edwards' body. His DNA is on her bedding. His DNA proves he was there the night she died. Foreman's face goes white. His hands start shaking. He's silent for a long moment. Then he says he wants a lawyer. The interview is over. But he's already given them what they need. He lied. Said he barely knew Catherine. Said there was no reason his DNA would be near her. Said he never went to her house. All lies. All on tape. And now they have the DNA evidence, proving those lies. The moment Clayton Foreman stands up from that interview table, the moment he walks toward the door thinking he's going to leave, go home, call an attorney, and figure out how to fight this, the investigators stop him. Clayton Bernard Foreman, you're under arrest for the capital murder of Mary Catherine Edwards. They pull out handcuffs. But not just any handcuffs. These are special. These are the exact handcuffs that were taken as evidence from Catherine Edwards' body in 1995. The same handcuffs that bound her wrists behind her back as she died. The same handcuffs that detectives tried to trace 29 years ago. The same handcuffs that have been in evidence storage all this time, carefully preserved, waiting for this moment. Texas Ranger Brandon Bess places those handcuffs on Clayton Foreman's wrists, closes them, locks them. The same handcuffs. It's poetic justice in the most literal sense. Years later, when Ranger Bess is interviewed about this case, he gets emotional talking about that moment. "It was important to us," he says. "You feel like you got to do something for Catherine there. Like physically got to do for her is take those cuffs that bound her when she was murdered and put them back on the guy that murdered her. It may seem small to some, but it was a really big deal to us, and it felt good, and it feels right." After 29 years, Catherine Edwards finally gets a measure of justice. Foreman is taken into custody, processed, fingerprinted, photographed, placed in a holding cell. He requests a lawyer, refuses to say anything more. The extradition process begins, Ohio to Texas. It takes a few weeks to work through the legal system, but there's no question about the outcome. Texas has a murder warrant. Foreman will be extradited to stand trial. While he's in custody, detectives back in Texas work on strengthening their case. They obtain a court-ordered blood sample from Foreman, more DNA for testing, more samples to compare against the evidence. Every test comes back the same. Match, match, match. His DNA is everywhere in Catherine's home. In her bedroom, in her bathroom, on her body, inside her body. There's no way to explain it away. No innocent reason for his DNA to be there. They review everything from the 1,981 sexual assault case. They locate Paula Bledsoe, now Paula Ramsey. She's in her late 50s now, married, has adult children. She hasn't thought about Clayton Foreman in years, hasn't had to think about him because she thought that chapter of her life was closed. But when investigators contact her, tell her they've arrested Foreman for murder, tell her they want her to testify about what he did to her in 1981, all of those memories come flooding back. The fear, the pain, the violation, the shame she felt even though she'd done nothing wrong. She agrees to testify. After 40 years, she's ready to tell her story again, to make sure a jury understands what kind of person Clayton Foreman is, to get justice for Catherine Edwards, because she knows what it feels like to be Foreman's victim. In August 2021, Clayton Foreman is extradited to Texas. He's transported by U.S. Marshals, flown from Ohio to Beaumont, taken directly to Jefferson County Jail. He's arraigned on charges of capital murder. In Texas, capital murder is defined as murder under specific circumstances, including murder committed during the course of another felony like sexual assault, murder of multiple people, murder of a police officer, or murder for hire. Catherine Edwards' case qualifies as capital murder because she was murdered during the commission of sexual assault. Capital murder in Texas carries two possible sentences: life in prison without the possibility of parole, or the death penalty. Foreman pleads not guilty. His attorney, Tom Burbank, a veteran defense lawyer with decades of experience, faces an uphill battle. The DNA evidence is overwhelming. The connection to Catherine through the wedding is established. The 1,981 sexual assault shows a pattern of behavior. But Burbank does his job. He files motions, challenging the admissibility of the genetic genealogy evidence. He argues that using DNA from public databases violates privacy rights. He argues that the 1,981 conviction is too old and too different to be relevant. He argues that the prosecution is trying to paint Foreman as a monster based on something that happened 40 years ago. The judge denies most of his motions. The genetic genealogy is admissible. The 1,981 conviction is admissible to show pattern and modus operandi. The DNA evidence is admissible. The trial is scheduled for March 2024. Nearly 3 years after Foreman's arrest. Nearly 29 years after Catherine's murder. The trial of Clayton Bernard Foreman begins on the 18th of March 2024 in Jefferson County District Court in Beaumont, Texas. Judge John Stevens presiding. The courtroom is packed. Catherine's family is there, including Allison Brocato, now in her 60s, gray-haired but still bearing that uncanny resemblance to her murdered twin. Catherine's friends are there, former colleagues from Price Elementary School, members of the community who remember the case from 1995, and the media, local news stations, regional newspapers, true crime reporters from across the country. This case has garnered national attention because of how it was solved. Genetic genealogy is still relatively new in forensic investigations. Cases like this one, where cutting-edge science brings a decades-old murder to trial, fascinate people. The prosecution team is led by Assistant District Attorneys Mike Laird and Patrick Knauth. Both are experienced prosecutors with dozens of trials between them. They know this case is strong. The DNA evidence alone would be enough to convict. But they want the jury to understand the full picture. To understand that this wasn't a one-time incident. That Clayton Foreman is a predator who has a pattern of sexually assaulting women. That Catherine Edwards wasn't his first victim, just his last. The defense table has Clayton Foreman, now 74 years old, wearing a suit, glasses, looking frail and elderly. Beside him sits Tom Burbank, his attorney, and a paralegal. Jury selection takes 2 days. The attorneys question potential jurors extensively about their views on DNA evidence, on genetic genealogy, on whether they can set aside what they might have heard about the case and judge based only on evidence presented at trial. Finally, 12 jurors and 2 alternates are seated. 8 women, 4 men, mix of ages, races, backgrounds. These 12 people will decide Clayton Foreman's fate. The trial begins with opening statements. Assistant DA Mike Laird stands before the jury, thanks them for their service, tells them they're about to hear a story that spans nearly 3 decades, a story about a beloved teacher who was brutally murdered in her own home, a story about a family that waited 29 years for answers, a story about how science refused to let Catherine Edwards stay forgotten. He outlines the evidence they'll present. The DNA, the genetic genealogy, the connection between Foreman and Catherine, the 1,981 sexual assault that shows Foreman's pattern of behavior, and he tells them about Paula Ramsey, who will bravely take the stand to tell them what Foreman did to her 43 years ago. When he finishes, defense attorney Tom Burbank approaches the jury. He acknowledges that this is a terrible case, that Catherine Edwards' murder was tragic, that her family deserves answers, but he tells the jury that the state hasn't met its burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That DNA can be transferred innocently. That being at someone's house doesn't mean you killed them. That a conviction from 1,981 for a completely different crime doesn't prove Foreman committed this murder. He tells them to listen carefully to all the evidence, to not be swayed by emotion, to remember that in America, a person is innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Then, the evidence begins. The prosecution calls its first witness, Allison Brocado. She walks slowly to the stand, is sworn in, takes her seat. The prosecutors ask her gently to tell the jury about her sister, about Catherine. Allison's voice shakes as she speaks. Catherine was my twin sister. We were identical. We did everything together. She was kind, generous, dedicated to her students. She wanted to make the world better, wanted to help children learn and grow. She describes the last time she saw Catherine alive, the 13th of January, 1995. Catherine came to pick up her dog. They talked, played with Allison's baby. Catherine seemed a little quiet, but Allison didn't think anything was wrong. She tells the jury about the next day, when Catherine didn't show up for lunch, when she wouldn't answer her phone, about going to Catherine's townhouse with their parents, about finding her sister dead in the bathtub. Allison breaks down on the stand, sobs openly. The jury watches, some of them crying too. The bailiff hands Allison tissues. The judge asks if she needs a break. She shakes her head. No, she can continue. She needs to do this for Catherine. The prosecutors ask about the impact of Catherine's death on the family. Allison describes how her parents never recovered, how they died without ever knowing who killed their daughter, how she's lived for 29 years with half of herself missing, how every birthday, every holiday, every milestone, has been marked by Catherine's absence. She looks directly at Clayton Foreman. He doesn't look back, stares at the table in front of him. The defense attorney cross-examines, but gently. There's no way to attack a grieving sister without alienating the jury. He asks a few questions about Catherine's life, whether she ever mentioned Foreman, whether Allison remembered seeing them interact at the wedding in 1982. Allison says she doesn't remember much about the wedding. She and Catherine were young bridesmaids. They were there for Deanna, the bride, who was their friend. She doesn't remember anything unusual about Foreman. The prosecution calls Dr. Thomas Harlan, the medical examiner who performed Catherine's autopsy in 1995. He's retired now, in his 70s, but his memory of the case is sharp. He testifies about the condition of Catherine's body when it was found, the handcuffs binding her wrists, the water in the tub, the evidence of sexual assault. He explains his original conclusion that the cause of death was drowning, that Catherine, handcuffed and helpless, was unable to keep her head above water and drowned. But then, the prosecution calls Dr. Charles Harvey, a forensic pathologist who reviewed the autopsy report and crime scene photos in preparation for this trial. Dr. Harvey testifies that while drowning may have been the initial determination, there's another possibility: entrapment, asphyxiation. He explains that if someone is held face down in water, even shallow water, and is unable to lift their head, they will asphyxiate. They can't breathe. Their lungs may fill with water, yes, but the primary cause of death is the inability to draw breath. He testifies that based on the position of Catherine's body, based on the amount of water in the tub, based on the handcuffs restraining her, it's likely that Clayton Foreman forcibly held Catherine's head underwater until she asphyxiated. This wasn't an accidental drowning. This was murder. Deliberate, calculated murder. The prosecution calls the DNA experts. First, the original forensic scientist who processed the evidence in 1995. She testifies about collecting semen samples from Catherine's body and bedroom, about developing a DNA profile, about entering it into CODIS, about getting no matches. Then, they call the scientists from Othram. They explain forensic-grade genome sequencing, explain how they were able to extract DNA from degraded samples that wouldn't have worked with 1995 technology, explain how they generated an enhanced profile that was suitable for genetic genealogy. The testimony is technical, but the experts do a good job of explaining it in terms the jury can understand. They use visual aids, charts, graphs, showing how DNA works, how sequencing works, how matches are determined. Then comes Shara LaPointe, the genetic genealogist. She testifies about receiving the DNA profile from Othram, about uploading it to GEDmatch Pro, about finding the second cousin match. She walks the jury through the process of building the family tree, shows them, on a large screen, the actual family tree she constructed. Hundreds of names, branching out across generations, narrowing down to a handful of candidates, ultimately pointing to Clayton Foreman. She explains that this isn't guesswork. This is science. The same science that people use to find relatives, to learn about their ancestry, applied to forensic investigation. The defense attorney cross-examines, but Shara holds her ground. Yes, errors are possible. That's why investigators confirm the match with a direct DNA sample, which is exactly what happened here. Foreman's DNA, collected from his trash, was compared directly to the crime scene evidence. It matches. Not a familial match. A direct, definitive match. Then comes the testimony about the trash collection. Detective Aaron Llewellyn testifies about traveling to Ohio, about conducting surveillance on Foreman's home, about collecting trash from his curb, about transporting it back to Texas for analysis. The defense argues this is an invasion of privacy, but Detective Llewellyn explains the abandoned property doctrine. The lab technicians testify about processing the trash. Multiple samples were tested. Multiple comparisons were made. Every single one matched. The probability that this DNA belongs to someone other than Clayton Foreman is essentially zero. The prosecution then establishes Foreman's connection to Catherine. They call Diana DeLeo, Foreman's ex-wife. She testifies about their wedding in 1982, about asking Catherine and Allison Edwards to be bridesmaids, about finding out about Foreman's 1,981 arrest just days before the wedding, about how he lied to her. She testifies that Catherine and Allison were at the wedding, that Foreman knew them, that over the years they occasionally socialized at gatherings, that Foreman would have known where Catherine lived. Then the prosecution does something that will prove to be the most powerful part of their case. They call Paula Bledsoe Ramsey to the stand. The courtroom goes completely silent as she walks to the witness stand. She's 62 years old now. She looks nervous, but there's determination in her eyes. The prosecutor asks her to state her name. Paula Bledsoe Ramsey. Do you know the defendant, Clayton Foreman? Yes, I know him. Can you tell the jury how you know him? Her voice is steady now. In March 1981, Clayton Foreman raped me. Paula takes a deep breath, and then she tells her story. She was 19 years old. She knew who Foreman was. When he offered her a ride, she didn't think anything of it. She got in his car. She trusted him. He drove to a secluded area, pulled out a knife, used a belt to bind her wrists behind her back, and then, for over an hour, he raped her repeatedly while holding that knife. Paula is crying now as she testifies. The jury is crying, but she continues. When he was done, he acted like nothing had happened, drove her home, told her to have a good night. She didn't report it immediately, waited a week, but finally found the courage. He was arrested, charged, but he took a plea deal, got probation, no prison time. The prosecutor asks the crucial question, why did you agree to testify today? Paula looks directly at Foreman. I wanted to see justice done for Catherine. I wanted her family to know who killed her. And I wanted this jury to understand that what happened to Catherine wasn't a one-time thing. Clayton Foreman has been hurting women for over 40 years, and it's time for him to pay for it. The courtroom remains absolutely silent after Paula's testimony. The weight of her words hangs in the air. 43 years she's carried this trauma. 43 years she's lived with what Clayton Foreman did to her. And now, finally, she's speaking not just for herself but for Catherine Edwards, for a woman who can no longer speak for herself. The defense attorney's cross-examination is brief and cautious. He asks a few questions about the timeline, about whether Paula is certain of the details after so many years. Paula answers each question directly, calmly. Yes, she's certain. These aren't the kind of details you forget. When he asks if she holds a grudge against Foreman, Paula considers this. Then she says something that will be quoted in news coverage for weeks. I don't think wanting someone to be held accountable for raping you is holding a grudge. I think it's expecting justice. The defense attorney sits down. There's nothing more he can ask without making things worse. Paula is dismissed. As she walks past the defense table, Foreman still won't look at her, still stares at the table as if refusing to acknowledge her existence will somehow make her testimony disappear. The prosecution calls a few more witnesses, neighbors from Catherine's townhouse complex, who remember that January night. One woman testifies she heard sounds coming from Catherine's apartment around 10 p.m., raised voices, a thump, like something falling, then silence. At the time, she didn't think much of it, but after Catherine was found dead, she reported it to police. Another neighbor testifies about seeing an unfamiliar car parked near Catherine's townhouse that evening. Dark-colored sedan. He couldn't remember more details after all these years, but it stood out because he had to park further down the street. Foreman's vehicle records from 1995 show he owned a dark blue sedan at that time. The prosecution rests its case after 5 days of testimony. The evidence is overwhelming. DNA proof that Foreman was in Catherine's home, on her body, inside her body. Evidence that he knew her, that she would have let him in. Evidence from Paula Ramsey that he has a pattern of restraining women's hands behind their backs and sexually assaulting them. The connection to the 1,981 assault is impossible to ignore. The same modus operandi. Hands restrained behind the back. Sexual assault. The only difference is that Catherine didn't survive. The defense begins its case, but Tom Burbank is in an impossible position. What can he say? How can he explain away the DNA? How can he counter Paula Ramsey's testimony? How can he make a jury forget what they've heard? He calls no witnesses. Foreman doesn't testify. To testify would be to open himself up to cross-examination, to questions about the 1,981 assault, about the lies he told in his police interview, about why his DNA is inside a murdered woman, if he barely knew her. Burbank knows putting Foreman on the stand would be suicide, so the defense rests without calling a single witness. It's a strategy born of desperation. When you have no good options, sometimes the least bad option is to do nothing. In his closing argument, defense attorney Tom Burbank makes what case he can. He reminds the jury that the burden of proof is on the prosecution, that they must find Foreman guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. He argues that being at someone's house doesn't prove you murdered them, that the 1,981 conviction, terrible as it was, doesn't prove Foreman killed Catherine Edwards. He tells the jury that they might not like Clayton Foreman, that they might be angry about what they've heard, but anger isn't evidence. Dislike isn't proof. The state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Clayton Foreman committed this murder, and he argues, without much conviction in his own voice, that they haven't met that burden. But everyone in the courtroom knows it's a losing battle. The prosecution's closing argument is devastating. Assistant District Attorney Mike Laird walks the jury through the evidence. The DNA that matches Foreman, not similar, not consistent with, matches, definitively, conclusively. His DNA inside Catherine's body, his DNA on her bedding. DNA doesn't lie. He recounts the testimony from neighbors who heard sounds from Catherine's apartment that night. The struggle. Then, silence. He describes how Catherine, once handcuffed, had little opportunity to fight. How Foreman, who had done this before, who had restrained and raped Paula Ramsey in 1981 using the exact same method, knew exactly what he was doing. He explains how Foreman raped Catherine and then held her head underwater until she asphyxiated, until she couldn't breathe anymore, until she died in her own bathtub, helpless and terrified. He addresses the lies Foreman told in his police interview, said he barely knew Catherine, said there was no reason his DNA would be near her, said he never went to her house. All lies, all proven false by the evidence. And he talks about Paula Ramsey, about her courage in coming forward 43 years after her assault to testify for Catherine, about the pattern these two cases reveal, about how if the justice system had properly punished Foreman in 1981, if he'd gone to prison instead of getting probation, Catherine Edwards would likely still be alive today. Assistant District Attorney Patrick Knauth takes over for the final portion. He speaks directly to the jury about justice. No parent should have to go through what Catherine's parents went through. You need to bring them justice. I wish they were alive to see this day. He tells the jury they'll be the last voice to speak for Catherine, that they can be the champions for her and her family. And they can do it with one word: guilty. The jury deliberates for less than 50 minutes, 48 minutes to be exact. They come back with a unanimous verdict. The bailiff calls the court to order. Everyone stands as the judge enters. The judge asks the jury foreman if they've reached a verdict. They have. The clerk reads the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Clayton Bernard Foreman, guilty of capital murder. The courtroom erupts. Not with cheers, but with a collective exhale. Like everyone has been holding their breath for 29 years and can finally release it. Catherine's family sits quietly, tears streaming down faces. Allison puts her face in her hands and sobs. Her husband puts his arm around her. Friends hug each other. Some people cry. Some sit in stunned silence. It's been 29 years. 29 years of questions, of pain, of wondering if they'd ever get answers. And now they have them. Clayton Bernard Foreman sits motionless at the defense table. His face is blank. No emotion. No remorse. Just emptiness. In Texas, capital murder carries an automatic life sentence if the death penalty is not pursued. The prosecution had decided not to seek the death penalty in this case, partly because of Foreman's age, partly because a life sentence means he dies in prison regardless. The judge sentences Clayton Foreman to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Unlike other life sentences in Texas where inmates become eligible for parole after 30 or 40 years, capital murder with a life sentence means exactly that. Life. No parole. No possibility of release. Foreman will die in prison. After the verdict, several jurors speak to the media. Larry Del Cambra, a pastor from Port Neches, says Catherine's twin sister, Allison, gave incredible testimony. That knowing she lost her twin was really difficult for the jury to hear. He mentions Paula Ramsey's testimony. Her lack of justice for many years was very difficult for us. It was a tough case. You had to listen to everything to make sure everything was put together correctly. We did that. Another juror, who asks not to be identified, says the DNA evidence was overwhelming. There was no way to explain it away. And Paula Ramsey's testimony showed that this wasn't a one-time thing, that Foreman had a pattern, that he was dangerous, that he needed to be locked up for the rest of his life. Genetic genealogist Shara LaPointe, who helped build the family tree that identified Foreman, attends the verdict reading. Afterwards, she talks about the work. I think it was an amazing team effort. This works. This is the crime-fighting tool of the future, genetic genealogy, and it's speaking for victims who cannot speak for themselves. She mentions how the family talked about making sure Catherine was never forgotten. She wasn't, and she'll never be forgotten. I'll never forget her for sure. Texas Ranger Brandon Bess, who arrested Foreman and placed those handcuffs on him, also speaks to reporters. He gets emotional, talking about the case. After 29 years, to be able to tell the family that we know who did this, that we have him in custody, that he's going to face justice, that was one of the most rewarding moments of my career. And using those same handcuffs that bound Catherine when she died, putting them on the person who murdered her, that felt right. That felt like justice. The Edwards family releases a statement through their attorney. It's been a long, emotional journey to finally see justice and closure after nearly 3 decades. We are grateful to the Beaumont Police Department, the Texas Rangers, Othram Incorporated, and everyone who worked tirelessly to solve Catherine's case. We're especially grateful to Paula Ramsey for her courage in testifying. We want people to remember Catherine not as a murder victim, but as a dedicated teacher, a loving sister, daughter, and aunt, and a beautiful person who touched countless lives. While nothing can bring Catherine back to us, knowing that her killer will spend the rest of his life in prison brings us some measure of peace. That's all they say. Because what else is there to say? Their daughter, their sister, is still gone. Justice doesn't bring her back. It doesn't erase 29 years of pain and unanswered questions. It doesn't give Catherine's parents the closure they deserved before they died. But it does something. It says that Catherine Edwards mattered, that her life had value, that the person who took it from her had to answer for what he did, even if it took nearly 30 years. It says that science and persistence and dedicated investigators can bring justice even when decades have passed. It says that cold cases aren't hopeless, that families shouldn't give up, that someday, somehow, the truth will come out. Clayton Foreman is currently incarcerated in a Texas prison. He filed an appeal of his conviction in late 2024, arguing that the genetic genealogy evidence should not have been admitted, that the 1,981 conviction was prejudicial and shouldn't have been allowed, that his constitutional rights were violated. But legal experts say his appeal is unlikely to succeed. The genetic genealogy was properly conducted and has been upheld in numerous other cases. The 1,981 conviction was relevant to show pattern and modus operandi. His Miranda rights were read to him before the interview. The DNA evidence is irrefutable. He will almost certainly spend the rest of his life in prison. He'll die there, old and forgotten, and Catherine Edwards will be remembered. Remembered as the beloved 4th-grade teacher who made every student feel special, as the identical twin who was inseparable from her sister Allison as the daughter who was loved beyond measure by parents who died without seeing justice, as the aunt who adored her niece, as the friend who was always there when you needed her, as the woman whose murder went unsolved for 29 years until science refused to let her stay forgotten. This case is a testament to so many things. To the power of persistence, to investigators who never gave up, who kept working the case even when it seemed hopeless, to technology that evolved and improved until it could finally deliver the answers that 1,995 science couldn't provide, to genetic genealogists who took DNA data and transformed it into family trees that led to killers, to victims like Paula Ramsey, who found the courage to testify about the worst day of their lives because they wanted justice for someone else, to families like the Edwards family who waited decades, who suffered unimaginable loss, who never stopped hoping that someday they'd get answers. The Catherine Edwards case is one of hundreds being solved across America right now using forensic genetic genealogy. As of 2025, cold cases that were considered unsolvable are being cracked open with this technology. Killers who thought they got away with it 30, 40, even 50 years ago are being arrested. Victims who were Jane and John Does, buried without names, are finally being identified and returned to their families. The technology continues to improve. What requires tens of thousands of dollars and months of work today will be faster and cheaper tomorrow, which means more cases will be solved. More families will get answers. More victims will get justice. More predators will face consequences. But these cases also raise important questions. Questions about privacy, about genetic databases, about who has access to our DNA and what they can do with it, about the balance between solving crimes and protecting civil liberties. When you submit your DNA to an ancestry website, you're probably not thinking that it might be used to solve a murder. You're thinking about finding distant cousins, learning what percentage Irish or Italian or West African you are, connecting with relatives you never knew existed. But your genetic information doesn't just belong to you. It reveals information about your relatives too. Your parents, your siblings, your cousins, your children, everyone who shares your DNA. Is that a good thing? When it solves cases like Catherine Edwards' murder, when it brings dangerous predators like Clayton Foreman to justice? Absolutely. When it identifies remains and brings closure to families who have waited decades to know what happened to their loved ones, yes. But it's worth thinking about the implications. Worth understanding what we're giving up when we voluntarily submit our most personal information to databases. Worth having conversations about where the line is between solving crimes and violating privacy. Some people argue that genetic genealogy is an invasion of privacy. That using DNA people uploaded for one purpose to solve crimes is a violation of trust. That it opens the door to potential abuses, to governments or corporations having access to genetic information that could be used in ways we can't predict. Others argue that if you haven't committed a crime, you have nothing to worry about. That solving murders and identifying victims is worth any privacy concerns. That the people whose DNA leads to suspects aren't suspects themselves, they're just distant relatives who happen to share genetic material. That this is no different than traditional detective work, just using modern tools. The truth, as usual, is complicated. There are legitimate privacy concerns. There are also legitimate public safety benefits. The key is having proper oversight, proper regulations, proper safeguards to prevent abuse while still allowing this powerful tool to be used for justice. Most genetic genealogy databases now have clear policies about law enforcement access. GEDmatch, for example, defaulted to opt out for law enforcement searches after privacy concerns were raised, meaning users have to actively choose to allow their DNA to be used for criminal investigations. But even with opt-out, there are often enough people who remain opted in to make the databases useful. It's a balance, and it's a conversation society needs to have as this technology becomes more prevalent. For now, though, for Catherine Edwards' family and friends, for Paula Ramsey, for the Beaumont community that never forgot, this is justice. Imperfect, delayed, insufficient because nothing will ever bring Catherine back, but justice nonetheless. Clayton Foreman will spend the rest of his life in prison. He'll die there, old and forgotten, while Catherine Edwards will be remembered. Remembered for who she was, not just for how she died. Remembered as a teacher, a sister, a daughter, an aunt, a friend. Remembered as someone who mattered, someone whose life had value, someone whose death demanded justice, even if it took 29 years to achieve it. The case has inspired other cold case units across the country. Beaumont Police Department has partnered with Othram on several additional cold cases since Catherine's murder was solved. Texas Rangers have reopened dozens of unsolved murders, sending evidence for genetic genealogy analysis. Police departments from Alaska to Florida are following the same path, uploading DNA to genealogy databases, building family trees, identifying suspects who thought they'd gotten away with murder, and they're succeeding. Month after month, year after year, more cold cases are being solved, more families are getting closure, more killers are facing justice. It's a revolution in law enforcement, a paradigm shift in how we investigate crimes, and it's only going to grow. If this case moved you, if you believe stories like Catherine's need to be told, I need you to do 3 things right now. Subscribe to Untold Case Desk if you haven't already. We're committed to bringing you these stories, these cases where science and persistence and dedication bring justice even decades later. Hit that like button to let me know you appreciate this deep dive into Catherine's case, and share this video. Share it for Catherine. Share it for her family who waited 29 years for answers. Share it for Paula Ramsey, who found the courage to testify. Share it for every cold case victim still waiting for justice. Share it for every family still waiting for closure. Because these stories matter. These lives matter. These victims deserve to be remembered, not just as statistics, not just as case numbers, not just as Jane and John Does, but as people, as individuals who were loved, who had dreams, who had futures that were stolen from them. And as long as science keeps evolving, as long as investigators keep working these cases, as long as genetic genealogists keep building family trees that lead to killers, as long as there are people willing to seek truth and justice no matter how much time has passed, we'll keep telling these stories. We'll keep shining light on cases that others have forgotten. We'll keep fighting for victims who can no longer fight for themselves. We'll keep demanding justice, even when it takes 29 years. Catherine Edwards was 31 years old when she was murdered. She should be 60 years old today. She should have gotten married, had children, watched her niece grow up, celebrated countless holidays with her twin sister, retired from teaching after a long and fulfilling career. She should have lived. But Clayton Foreman took that from her, took her future, her dreams, her life. He took her from her family, from her students, from everyone who loved her. And for 29 years, he lived free while they suffered. But not anymore. Now he'll spend the rest of his life in a cell, thinking about what he did, thinking about how he got caught, thinking about how the DNA he left behind in 1995, the DNA he probably never even thought about, became the evidence that brought him down 3 decades later. That's the power of science. That's the power of persistence. That's the power of justice. I'm Untold Case Desk, and I'll see you in the next case. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share, because every case deserves to be told. Every victim deserves to be remembered, and every family deserves answers. Thank you for watching, and thank you for caring about Catherine Edwards' story. She mattered, and now, finally, the whole world knows that.